The Pentagon, led by Pete Hegseth, quietly closed off Ukraine's ability to carry out long-range strikes on Russia with Army Tactical Missile System missiles. The Wall Street Journal brings up this unpleasant truth and writes that since late spring, the Pentagon has been quietly blocking Ukrainians from using American Army Tactical Missile System missiles against targets inside Russia. The decision is made by United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The mechanism is handled by Hegseth's Deputy for Policy, Elbridge Colby. For us, this means a simple thing. While the posts say that victory is impossible without an offensive, as Donald Trump writes, in reality there is a filter for different permissions. I'll note right away that today Zelensky stated that this is false information, that supposedly the Americans didn't block anything. So let's break down exactly what the Wall Street Journal is writing, how this is confirmed by other sources, and why Kyiv is forced to increase its own long-range capabilities in order not to depend on this situation. So, my name is Alexei Pechi. Today is August 24th, Independence Day of our beloved Ukraine. Let's go through everything step by step. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is below. So, Wall Street writes today in plain text that the Pentagon is secretly blocking attacks on targets in Russia. Pete Hegseth has the final word. Elbridge Colby set up the review mechanism. The late Biden policy that allowed strikes on targets inside Russia has been revised, and so on. The Wall Street Journal adds that the controls affect European assets if they are tied to American data. It's unpleasant to hear, but this is not the reality of war through coordination, writes the Wall Street Journal. Interestingly, Reuters confirms the publication and writes that, quote, "The Pentagon is restricting the use of American missiles against targets in Russia," and mentions that the restriction is related to the White House's attempts to promote negotiations. That is, the policy of free strikes on Russian territory is officially supposedly not in effect. The so-called yellow light is in effect, meaning each strike requires coordination. The Pentagon, as American media further report, has indeed introduced a system of approvals. So there is no complete ban, but every attack on Russian territory using American missiles must be approved by the Pentagon. And it's very important for us to interpret this news correctly. So basically, right now, many media outlets present this as a complete ban on strikes on Russian territory. But in reality, that's not the case. This is a procedure, a complicated bureaucratic procedure, but nevertheless it exists and it has been in effect since the end of spring. Therefore, when Zelensky says today that the Americans did not forbid us from striking Russian territory, he is right, they did not forbid it. Each target is being coordinated. Now, the consequences? First and foremost, Ukraine is forced to accelerate the development of its long-range capabilities, meaning its long-range missiles. That is why drone strikes deep inside the Russian Federation are increasing, and a new cruise missile called Flamingo with its own systems is appearing. Kyiv, as you understand, does not depend on decisions made by others. This is evident from the geography of fires in Russia and the frequency of night attacks. This is a direct response to that very yellow light that was given to us in Washington. They say, coordinate every strike on Russian territory with us. Ukraine says, listen, we have long-range drones, we're getting our own long-range missiles, so sorry, but we probably won't be coordinating in the future. We will strike wherever we see fit. Second, Europeans also end up under the yellow light. If their missiles or planes are powered by, for example, intelligence data from the United States of America, then the Pentagon is in fact reaching out to their launchers as well, so to speak. That is, if the Europeans have given us some kind of weapon, but in one way or another, this strike with European weapons will be connected to the use of American intelligence data, then the Americans can also block these strikes here. Does this break, the scheme and the statement about the automatic nature of future security guarantees for Ukraine? Well, because how is that automatic if every missile launch depends on permission from the Pentagon? That's why in Europe they're actively discussing how to create guarantees where there's no right to stop it, where there's no veto power. Neither the aggressor nor Ukraine will have to go through much external approval to use weapons, and the Europeans insist on this. Third, the statement that all these procedures are tied to the peace process. And the Wall Street Journal writes directly that the restriction is part of the logic. Third, Donald Trump not to burn bridges while pressure is being applied to Moscow, talks about sanctions and tariffs, the attempt to bring Zelensky and Putin together, and so on. Well, it looks good on paper, but on the ground. This means that some targets remain under Donald Trump's protection, some targets are on Russian territory, and Russia knows this. And the more permissions Kyiv needs, the easier it is for the Kremlin to live under the protection of its air defense deep inside the country. Fourth, this is the ammunition economy. Colby is organizing the so-called green, yellow and red baskets to preserve United States stockpiles in case China declares war on Taiwan. This is the official explanation for why they did it. Well, it kind of looks like it's honest. America doesn't want to take everything out of its pockets and give it all to Ukraine. That's the logic. But for Ukraine, it means not everything is available or timely. Therefore, when Trump says that Biden was bad because he only gave Ukraine defensive weapons, delayed it, and didn't allow strikes on Russian territory, he's being very dishonest. His current Pentagon is actually doing even worse. Well, he kind of gives weapons, but first of all, he doesn't really give them. He sells them to the Europeans. He says, we'll consider if you can use this missile to strike Russia or not. Therefore, we need to have our own and also have European supplies, where there's less integration with the American system. Nevertheless, I don't want to be the one who stirs up any talk of betrayal or conspiracies, you know. No, this isn't about conspiracies or betrayal. It's just the slow bureaucracy of war which lags behind the front lines. And that's exactly why we see Ukraine building a drone assembly line while our partners are discussing a post-war mission. With teeth, where help is activated automatically, not after 10 letters and approvals. This isn't emotional, it's a long-term deterrence strategy. Ukraine is seeking automation and security guarantees for Ukraine, so that when this happens, a certain procedure is automatically triggered. Not all these approvals, but clearly and to the point. So, yes, the Wall Street Journal's publication saying that the Pentagon supposedly forbade us from striking Russia is like a cold shower and a useful one. Let's put it this way. As long as the Army tactical missile system are on yellow light, we have to coordinate every strike. Ukraine is accelerating its own production of long-range missiles and is pulling Europe along into automating security guarantees. And the louder the results of Ukrainian attacks with Ukrainian drones and UAVs, the faster the Washington procedure will adapt to reality. Unfortunately, war doesn't wait for approvals. And, that's the main lesson from this article, where every word is about the system, not about yesterday, today. Today we give permission, tomorrow we don't, and so on. There should be a clear automatic system. If it works, let it continue as is. Not like Elbridge Colby with Pete Hegseth. They get together and probably sit down together to coordinate some strikes on Russian territory. Friends, I'll stop here for now. Let me assure you there's no panic. Yes, it's unpleasant news, but you shouldn't interpret it as if the Americans have completely forbidden strikes on Russian territory. That's an exaggeration. So share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.